Every form of Frieza isn't just a new look. It's a mask. It's a disguise for something far darker inside of him. From his smug first form, to the grotesque monster, to the sleek final form. Every transformation is a window into Frieza's broken psyche. And when you see what each one really means, you'll understand why he keeps coming back, again and again, never satisfied, never free. Because Frieza doesn't evolve. He hides, and every mask he wears tells us the truth he can't face. In this video, we'll explore the psychology of every Frieza transformation, from Freud's ego masks, to Jung's shadows, to Nietzsche's warning about power without limit. This isn't a story of evolution. It's the story of a man trapped in his own prison. Frieza's first form is the most deceptive of them all. Small, childlike, almost harmless in appearance. He sits in a floating throne, armored like a toy soldier, rarely dirtying his hands. He speaks with calm superiority, mocking his enemies as if the fight is already beneath him. At first glance, this form projects confidence, restraint, elegance, composure. But psychologically, what we're seeing is the mask of the ego. Freud described the ego as the mediator, the mask we present to the world to appear rational and in control while hiding the chaos beneath. Frieza's first form is exactly that, a projection of calm superiority, concealing the sadism boiling underneath. Notice how he uses this mask. He doesn't just fight, he delegates. His army crushes planets. His lieutenants, like Zarbon and Dodoria, do the killing. He postures on a throne, watching destruction from a safe distance. This isn't laziness. It's intimidation by restraint. By appearing untouchable, he asserts dominance without ever lifting a finger. It's psychological warfare. Think about the psychology here. What kind of person hides their fear of weakness by pretending they don't need to fight? The kind of person who knows, deep down, that their entire identity is fragile. Frieza's calmness is theater. The armor is theater. Even his body, compact, unimposing, is a performance. The weak appearance forces opponents to underestimate him, which makes the sadistic reveal of his true power all the more devastating. This is the paradox of the first form. It looks like control, but it's really insecurity wrapped in ritual. A person who is truly secure doesn't need to orchestrate every detail of dominance, but Frieza does. Okay? He has to be above the fight, above the dirt, above the suffering. Okay? Because if he ever stood at the same level as his enemies, they might see the fear he's hiding. And yet, the cracks show. Even in this restrained form, his sadism slips out. He toys with victims, smirks at their terror, and hides cruelty behind a mask of politeness. Okay. This is ego at work, not genuine calm, but a desperate performance of control. The first form is not the weakest, it's the most dishonest. It's the mask he wants the universe to believe. The emperor who never breaks composure. But masks always crack. And when Frieza feels his control slipping, he doesn't stay small for long. He explodes. He grows. Deceptively, because the moment the mask falters, Frieza reveals his second form. In the psychology of pure overcompensation, the mask slips and the performance swells. He becomes towering, horned, grotesquely imposing as if height and bulk could settle an old argument inside his chest. His body is built to intimidate. It's not elegance. It's intimidation architecture. The smirk hardens, the voice rises, the gestures get big. Everything screams, "Look how little I fear you," which is always what people say when they fear being seen as small. Adler called it the inferiority complex. When you feel inadequate, you overcorrect. You puff out your chest. You take up space. You speak louder than the room requires. Okay. Frieza's second form is this logic carved into flesh. The small emperor who once ruled from a chair now storms the stage like a bully who found a bigger corridor. He doesn't simply want to win. He wants the world to feel tiny beneath the shadow he casts. The horns curve like a threat, made permanent. The armor swells as if to say, my body is the argument. Watch how he uses it. He doesn't fight to end a conflict. He performs to stage a hierarchy. He stalks, barks, postures. It's domination as theater, a pageant meant to teach the audience where power lives. Tyrants understand this. Fear is cheaper than trust, and a spectacle of cruelty buys obedience for a discount. So he buys again and again till fear is the only currency he recognizes. Then he impales Krillin. Not as a tactical necessity, as a demonstration. The act is precise, sadistic, and slow enough to be understood by everyone watching. It's the bully's favorite sermon. Pain is my punctuation. This is overcompensation, doubling as pedagogy. The body got larger, and the cruelty got louder, because the insecurity got closer to the surface. Power, here, is not a two lids, a microphone. Notice the rhythm. The more he inflates himself, the more he must act vicious to justify the inflation. If he really were as complete as his posture suggests, he wouldn't need to brutalize to make a point. But overcompensation is hungry. It doesn't want victory. It wants spectacle. The second form narrates itself in capital letters because the inner narrative is whispering, don't look behind the curtain. And there is a cost. When you build your identity on fear, you must feed it. You need bigger scenes, sharper horns, harsher punishments. Overcompensation narrows your range of response until only escalation feels like control. The second form commits him to a loop. Intimidate, injure, inflate, repeat. He's not more secure, he's just more committed to the illusion that size can solve dread. This is the trap of theatrical strength. Feels like power, but it functions like a dependency. It becomes reliant on the audience's terror to anchor his self. The instant terror falters when opponents adapt. When courage, flickersy must grow again, louder, crueler, larger, until his own performance terrifies even him. So he sheds this body like a stage costume and reaches for something even the mask can't conceal. Overcompensation was supposed to silence the tremor. Instead, it amplified it, okay? And when the shouting doesn't work, the shadow steps forward and takes the microphone. He isn't stronger inside, it's just louder outside. Now the human outline vanishes. The body elongates, the skull stretches, the face hardens into angles that suggest knives. The aesthetic shifts from imperial to alien. Whatever made him legible as a person is retired. This is not majesty. This is appetite given anatomy. If the first form was a mask and the second was armor, this one is confession. Jung called the unowned part of the psyche the shadow, the impulses we repress because they threaten the story we tell about ourselves. Frieza's story is royalty, control, effortless superiority. What doesn't fit that story? The feral hunger, the ecstatic cruelty, the predator's joy gets shoved into the dark. In the third form, the dark pushes back. The shadow isn't a rumor anymore. It is a body with edges. The features say it plainly. The elegant lines are gone, replaced by ridges and talons. The smile loses its civilized curve and thins into a predator's slit. Even the movement changes. He doesn't merely step, he stalks. This is the psyche abandoning diplomacy. Okay. No throne, no polish, no pretense of gentility. Okay. The parts he couldn't embrace now wear him like a suit. The terror he evokes here is different. Warriors who have faced God's planche, not because of a simple power gap, but because the form feels wrong in a way power meters can't measure. It's primal. The revulsion that precedes language, the body's memory of when eyes in the tall grass belonged to something that knew only hunger. He stands there, and reality feels thinner. That's what the shadow does when it surfaces. It warps the air. Strength, at this point, is almost incidental. What terrifies is recognition. You're not just facing an enemy, you're staring at a distilled instinct destruction without ornament. The first form intellectualized cruelty. The second dramatized it. The third metabolizes it. The repression has ended, and the appetite has the floor. There's a reason monsters in myth look like composites. Too many teeth, extra joints, eyes where they don't belong. They announce the violation of a boundary. Frieza's third form is that announcement. He is crossed from tyrant to thing, from ruler to appetite, and the very geometry of his body refuses to pretend otherwise. No crown could sit on this head, built for devouring, not for ceremony. Here, the psychology becomes visceral. Hide something long enough, and it stops asking permission. The shadow, denied dialogue, chooses eruption. The polite sadist of the first act and the blustering bully of the second are both swallowed by the appetite they were designed to conceal. He moves faster, hits harder, toys less, because there is less to toy with. The performance collapses into predation. Fear has finished turning into flesh. This is the form that answers a question no tyrant wants to hear. What are you when the spotlight is off? He is this knife-boned hunger with the volume turned up to reality. The universe is not an audience anymore. It's a pantry. And yet, even this confession is not the end. The shadow can erupt, but it can also exhaust. One cannot remain a pure appetite and still narrate oneself as ultimate. The grotesque risks revealing something he refuses to accept, that beneath the futile pomp, he is driven by the same animal current as everyone he despises. He needs a new story, a cleaner lie, one that can repackage hunger as serenity. When you hide your darkest parts, don't they eventually take a form of their own? He has seen that form now, and so have we. The next step, in his mind, must be purification, not of the soul, but of the surface. If the shadow cannot be integrated, it will be polished. If the hunger cannot be tamed, it will be dressed in white. He strips himself of ornament. The spikes fall away. The bulk recedes. What remains is a body like polished bone and glass, smooth, symmetrical, unnervingly clean. In the bright light of Namek, Frieza's final form reads like a refutation of everything that came before it. No horns, no ridges, no grotesque elaborations. It looks calm because it is calculated to look calm. It is the posture of someone who wants you to believe he has nothing left to prove. That appearance is the trick. The minimalism is not freedom. It is theater for a deeper attachment. Buddhism gives us a useful word here. Tanha, craving. Tanha is the paradoxical hunger that believes that removing attachments will finally satisfy craving. But craving doesn't disappear when you make yourself smaller or purer. It relocates. Stripping down the body becomes another way to cling to an idea of mastery. You think you've let go of armor, and in fact, you've replaced armor with an even denser insistence that your essence must be pure, unblemished, uncontested. Freud would point to another axis, the death drive, masked as serenity. The final form's calm is not a calm of contentment. It's a calm of contempt. Calmness becomes the most intimate face of cruelty, the ability to watch another suffer and not twitch, to administer harm with the measured patience of a surgeon. Ki, in this guise, destruction, looks elegant. Ku, standing over him, testing him, punishing him in tiny increments. You see the death drive at work. Keet is the impulse to return to an inorganic, untroubled state through annihilation of resistance. The smile is not absence of aggression. It is the mask of an aggression that does not need to shout. The scene on Namek is instructive. Frieza, clean and composed, doesn't rush. He phases through moments like a curator appraising a specimen. He pins Goku, lifts him, studies the face for panic, and then releases him to fight so the spectacle may continue. His cruelty is no longer about making a point in the loud, clumsy way of a bully. It's about curating suffering as an art form. The restraint gives cruelty a longer reach, a quiet that penetrates deeper than a scream. The final form turns violence into performance art. There is an existential lie behind this minimalism. The idea that fewer parts equals less internal conflict is seductive, but Frieza's reduction is not calmness achieved. It is craving refined, where the armored forms screamed insecurity through ornamentation. The final form whispers insecurity through serenity. He has not overcome desire. He has disciplined it into silence. That silence is more terrifying because it hints at a will that no longer needs the noise of intimidation. It can enact its will with a quietness that admits no negotiation. This is why the final form is the deadliest mask. It convinces you that the pursuit of purity will end suffering, even as it tightens the chains. Minimalism becomes a new attachment, the attachment to being essential, flawless, and, above all, uncontestable. He mistakes the absence of external clutter for inner release, and the result is a cruelty that is intimate and precise. He is no longer frantic, he is clinical. This isn't his final triumph, it is his final delusion. The serenity you see is not liberation. It's the last, neatest packaging of a compulsion that has only become more exacting. The simpler the surface, the more concentrated the hunger underneath. He believes he is finally pure enough to command being itself, but purity that is meant to dominate is still craving. It still binds. It still eats. And so Frieza toys and Goku endures. The audience watches both the fighting and the theater. So form that should signify perfection instead reveals the core pathology, the belief that to be minimal is to be free, when in fact the minimal has merely become the most efficient house for his obsession. This illusion that stripping down leads to freedom is the fatal lie of the final form. Underneath the elegant shell, craving continues to pulse like an engine. The real question is not whether the form is beautiful. The question is whether beauty can free a heart that is still chained to desire. For Frieza, it cannot. The smooth surface hides the same old hunger, only now it is rendered cleaner and therefore more dangerous. This final elegance is not transcendence. It is refinement of the same prison. He bulks up again, where the final form was sleek. The 100% surge turns him into an avalanche of muscle and pressure. Veins stand out like raised maps. His limbs swell, his chest balloons, and the air tastes thicker because the world seems to tilt under the weight of his force. This is his most physical assertion, not a thoughtful ruler, but a furnace of raw drive, pouring everything into one last, absolute push. Nietzsche's idea of the will to power helps here. The will to power is not simply dominance. It is the drive to assert value, to expand oneself, to impose one's form onto the world. It's creative when harmonized with life. It becomes catastrophic when it becomes compulsion. Frieza's 100% is the will to power pushed into its most literal form. An organism straining to exceed its design. T tries to be all might, all presence, untethered from the subtlety that once made him efficient. In chasing a boundless intensity, he breaks the balance that allowed him to control outcomes. There's an architectural truth in physiology. More mass demands more energy to move. As he inflates, he slows. What seemed unstoppable in theory becomes lumbering in practice. His center of gravity shifts. The grace that allowed him to outmaneuver fades into brute force that eats precision. His power, when piled on without regard for form and limits, becomes its own hindrance. He gains raw damage but loses agility, and agility is often the difference between victory and defeat in a fight measured by timing and adaptability. This is the psychological tragedy of overextension. Domination becomes obsession. An obsession narrows the range of possible responses until only escalation remains. When victory is defined as magnitude, every further step demands more magnitude. The loop closes, and the only solution seems to be doubling down, pumping until the body groans, the mind lurches, and mistakes multiply. In the battle, that slowness is fatal. Goku uses his opponent's newfound predictability. Time encounters where once only instinct and terror reigned. The spectacle of raw force cannot compensate for the loss of subtlety. Attacks that would have been lethal in a flash become opportunities to exploit. Frieza's muscles are engines with overheating pistons. The longer he sustains that strain, the less precise his control. He becomes susceptible, not because his strength ebbed, but because his form betrayed him. There's also an existential miscalculation here. The will to power poured into a single demonstrative act mistakes quantity for quality. Frieza believes that being more, bigger, heavier, more present will finally secure his dominance. But Nietzsche warns that power without affirmation can hollow the soul. A will that only seeks accumulation loses the capacity for creative transformation. It becomes a reactivity that must only add, never integrate. So he pushes until his movements become awkward, until the arrogance that fueled his rise becomes the blunt instrument that brings him down. The quest to be limitless warps the self into something brittle and overloaded. Power destroyed itself by trying to be limitless. The form that promised finality becomes the mechanism of collapse. Frieza didn't lose because Goku was merely stronger. He lost because he tried to become more than himself, and in that hubristic overreach, he traded the cunning and composure that made him dangerous for a monstrousness that could be timed. Read, and finally outmatched. The moral is cruel and simple. Domination pursued without limits becomes the architect of its own failure. In the furnace of his ambition, Frieza found not transcendence, but breaking. Death didn't teach him anything. It only bought him an intermission. They stitch him back together. Metal and flesh braided into a figure that looks both pathetic and frightening. The scars are not just surface level. They are a ledger of failed attempts, a physical record of refusal to change. Mecha Frieza arrives, smug, prosthetic limbs gleaming. Voice dripping with the same old contempt. But the new parts don't cure the pattern. They paper over it. Freud gave us a phrase for this: repetition, compulsion. The unconscious drive to repeat painful or traumatic events, as if by replaying them, you could alter the meaning. Except repetition, compulsion rarely redeems. It traps. It turns life into a looping reel where every reappearance demands the same script. Revenge, humiliation, escalation. Frieza's return as a cyborg is the textbook case. K refuses integration. Instead of mourning, reflecting, or reframing his defeat, he doubles down on the same logic that got him crushed. Attack, dominate, enact spectacle. The machine is not a new self. It's the old compulsion with better wiring. Consider his entrance on Earth. He lands with the swagger of someone convinced of fate's favor. The arrival is almost comic in its certainty. He is back, repaired, and the universe must now pay. But the planet has evolved. Players have shifted. The story no longer revolves around him the way it used to. Trunks stares at him and, in a single, devastating sequence, undoes the whole script. The cyborg smugness evaporates with a slash. The revenge that should have been catharsis becomes the punchline. What matters here is not only the physical humiliation. It is the psychic insistence on repeating the same pattern as if success is a mechanical fix. Replace a limb, crank a screw, and victory resumes. But behavior is not hardware alone. The repetition shows the inner refusal to learn. Death became a glitch, not a lesson. The cyborg is proof that survival without growth is survival without meaning. You can be reassembled, repaired, and relit. But if the pattern that destroyed you earlier remains, you are still trapped in the same prison. There's an existential horror in watching someone who can't absorb defeat. Humans learn by integrating loss into narrative. We tell story about failure, we rework strategy, we evolve. Repetition, compulsion denies narrative change. It treats life as a stage set where the same play will eventually reach a different act, if only you pound the scenery hard enough. Frieza's machinery is the physical metaphor for this. More power, same script. And then there's the grotesque irony. The cyborg was meant to be a final solution, a planned comeback. Yet, the moment of his reappearance, the universe offers a fresh variable Trunks, someone who has not been burned into the old choreography. New actors, new timing, new consequences. The repetition meets adaptation, and adaptation wins. In that clash, the message is clear. Repeating a strategy that failed before will not magically succeed when the world has moved on. Mecha Frieza teaches a cruel lesson about survival. Returning is not the same as becoming. Reassembling the body without reassembling the psyche is a hollow victory. The bits of metal can hold you up, but they cannot rewrite the script inside your head. The cyborg's death is not just defeat. It is the final coda of a pattern that could not be broken. Survival without learning is replaying the cell you already built around yourself. Survival as repetition is still captivity. The stitches that hold him together are the same threads that stitch him into a loop. He survives. Yes, but he remains a prisoner of a script that insists on playing itself out until someone else changes the channel.